Hi everyone, and welcome to this tutorial video. In this video I'm going to be showing you how I draw an eagle head, and for this tutorial I used a mechanical pencil with HB leads on a smooth Bristol board paper, but it doesn't matter the kind of equipment you're using as long as you have a pencil and paper at hand, and I also recommend using a blending stick and a small eraser. I started off by working on the outlines, and I initially worked on the forehead and the top of the head. From the forehead I was able to gauge where I wanted to add the beak, and then from the beak I was able to gauge where I wanted to start the eyebrow. The eyebrow is horizontally aligned initially towards the front of the head, and then it slants upwards when it's above the eye. This gives the eagle that kind of angry look that they naturally have. The eye itself is very circular, although it has a little bit of flattening towards the top. I also added a eyelid going equally all the way around the eye. And then I also made sure to add a circular pupil. And then it was time to sketch the outlines of the beak. The beak itself has a ridged section to begin with, and that contains the nostril. This whole section is about the same width as the eye, so that's a good guideline for how much you want to protrude it from the forehead. And then I sketched the rest of the outlines of the beak, starting with the inner edge, which moves almost horizontally. It's at a little bit of an angle. It has a couple of ridges towards the eagle's head, and then as going outwards it smooths off, and then it drops off at the end, and it's from that point at the tip of the beak that we can draw the rest of the smooth circular outline of the top of the beak. After that I sketched the outlines of the bottom section of the beak. It's curved off to begin with, and then it runs parallel with the rest of the lines I'd previously laid down. At this point I also added a couple of extra lines to show the wrinkles that would be towards the inside corner of the mouth. Once the main details of the face had been sketched, it was time to add some extra outlines of where the feathers would be lying, so I just added the rest of the outlines of the outside of the head. Making sure to leave these lines as faint as possible, because I don't want to have them take away from the details of the eye and the beak. And then with the outlines drawn, it was time to move on to the shading. As always with drawings like this, I like to start off by adding the shading and the details to the eye. So I started off by adding a dark outline around the outside of the eye, and then I added some smooth shading to the iris, making sure to leave an area where I wanted the white highlight towards the top of the eye, and I left the lighter shading towards the bottom of the eye. Leaving some darker shading towards the top of the eye is a way of showing the shadow cast by the eyebrow, and it's a great way of making an eye look realistic and 3D, especially when it contrasts with the bright highlight. For any of the smoother shading, I highly recommend using the blending stick. I also use the blending stick to help the smooth shading around the inside and outside edges of the eyelids, and then I left some highlights towards the middle sections of the eyelids to show that kind of skin texture. I wanted to add some wrinkles to the eyelids, so I added some lines with the pencil and then blended them with the blending stick to make them less sharp. And this really helps with the kind of wrinkled effect, especially when you use the eraser as well to help add some highlighted sections. Once I was happy with the details of the eye, I moved on to the other prominent feature of the face, and that is the beak. I wanted to use the blending stick for the majority of this section because the beak is very shiny and smooth, and the blending stick can really help with that. So I added some darker shading along the very top edge of the beak, and then I left some bright highlights underneath that to contrast and help with the kind of reflective surface that it is. I also left some white highlights around the bottom edge of the top part of the beak, and then I left some sort of medium shading towards the inside section. I added some really dark shading to the nostril, and I left a ridge of white highlights above that to make it seem like it's kind of protruding from the surface. For the lower section of the beak I added some darker shading, and I left a white highlight on the bottom to help with the kind of reflective surface again. And then for the rest of the details of the beak, I wanted the wrinkles to seem quite prominent, so I added some darker shading towards them, and then I contrasted them with using the eraser to add some highlights right next to them. And this is a great way of making a surface seem kind of wrinkled and rough, especially towards the inside corner of the mouth. This is really helpful at this section. Once I'd finished adding the shading to both the eye and the beak, it was time to move on to adding the shading and the feathers to the rest of the eagle's head. I started off by adding some darker sort of medium shading underneath the eyebrow, and then some lighter shading going above that next section of the beak that's just between the eye and that corner of the mouth. And once that smooth shading had been added, it was time to use the small eraser to add some feathers. And once you've added a layer of feathers, you can then use the pencil over the top of that to add another layer, and then you can use the eraser again to add more layers, and it's just a really great way of building up that layered effect. I used this same sort of method for the rest of the feathers around the eagle's head, but obviously the feathers are larger towards the top of the head and around the underneath of the beak. So I kind of started off by adding some shading, and then I used the blending stick. And then for the feathers I used the eraser, but I started off by adding using the eraser to add a long line, and then I added the fanned feathered effect from that one line to kind of almost like drawing the feathers with the eraser. It actually makes it look like there's a layer of feathers, and I was really excited to find out this method of creating feathers with just the eraser. It just creates the illusion of lots of feathers all layered on top of each other. I'll also try and zoom in on this video so you can see the process happening. So I just faded the feathers out towards the bottom, and then that was the drawing completed. The drawing in total took about 2 hours to complete, and I had so much fun working on it, and I really hope this video has helped in some way. If you work on anything similar, then feel free to show me your work on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, and I'll be sure to check it out. If you enjoy drawing videos and maybe you want to learn more about how to draw, then feel free to subscribe to this channel. And any likes or shares on this video are hugely appreciated, and it really means a lot to me. If you want to follow me on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram and follow along with the progress photos throughout the week, then be sure to check out the links in the description box below. And once again, thank you so much for the support on this channel. I really hope these videos help out. I have so much fun working on them, and I really appreciate the support. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you all soon.